Good evening. Tonight I thought I'm going to talk about only one topic, and that is oil and gasoline diesel. There's so much stuff floating around out there, in terms of why it is and why it is not, and why the prices are so high. And now some other people here starting to suggest we're going to be peak oil and we're going to be out of oil and there's not going to be any more oil and all of this stuff, which is a whole bunch of baloney. Whether here in the United States, in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, or the Russians, it's not there. Let me just put it that way. The reason for the high oil prices and the high gasoline prices have basically, I would say, at least two, if not three reasons which are responsible for this. And I will get to that in a minute. I'm going to dissect this. This is not, I don't think, a very long video. I live in Kansas. And here in Kansas, we have 4 refineries. These refineries are owned by a small corporation out of Colorado, which also operates 2 or 3 more refineries in, I think it was South Dakota, if I'm not mistaken. So they have a total of 7 smaller refineries. And here in Kansas, they're spread out mostly in the central region of Kansas, northeast region, and then further southeast and southwest. And the way this works here is we have oil fields, many oil fields, but all the oil fields are owned for the great majority, I would say probably 95%, by farmers, which farm on the soil. Crops, they grow crops here, all sorts of stuff. And this year they're producing more wheat. Usually they do corn, they do soya beans a lot, and that sort of stuff. And now, because of the wheat shortage, they started to seed out wheat, winter wheat, which is about ready now to be harvested in another few more weeks, I think a couple more weeks. And this is the reason why you see me itching my nose and, coughing a little bit more than normal, because I'm allergic. I have hay fever. And wheat especially is one of the pollen which I'm very allergic to. I always have been. So when they grow corn and soya beans, I usually have very little problems here with hay fever. But this year, because of the grain shortages, because of the war there in the Ukraine and Russia, with all of that disruption there, the farmers here decided to put out wheat and that kind of stuff. So I have had a rough year with allergies, especially, and I'm glad when the season is over. But they're probably gonna plant the summer wheat, which is then going to be harvested like in late October. So I'm going to have this going all the way through October this year until this normalizes. And, well, anyway, so our farmers here, and they're sitting on oil. And many of them do have oil pumps, wells, a well pump, they're small in size, with a tank next to it. And then you see the arm go up and down, up and down, up and down, and they pumping that out of here. And all of them farmers, they have started, the Kansas farmers, they have a cooperative. And the cooperative, all the farmers collectively, basically, or other people who have it on their property, there's a few people who have property, but they are not farmers. So they're pumping that oil and they're selling it to our local 4 refineries. They have a contract with them, and they're paying them prevailing market price. That is the oil price, whatever it is, $100 a barrel, $110 a barrel. And so, and these 4 refineries basically supply all our local gas stations here in Kansas. So if you travel to Kansas, and you go off the highway when you don't go to one of the multinational gas stations, BP or, Phillips 66, Conoco, those big ones, Shell, and you go, just off in the smaller towns. You usually have KC, Loves, and that sort of stuff. Then you will get local Kansas gas that is produced here, that is from our oil. We have no oil coming from anywhere. We have no oil coming from out of state. We have no oil, foreign oil. We have no Russian oil, no Saudi oil, nothing. It's Kansas oil, what we get into our cars through our local refineries. So we're an ecosystem in this. So, and our farmers have plenty of oil, and that is not going to run out until another 80 to 100 years from now with the way we're using it. And they're also getting their farm diesel out of it. We're not paying anything more and not anything less. We're on the bottom scale of the national average as a result out of it, because our costs are very low. The 4 refineries we have, they're interconnected by pipelines. And the farmers usually, the way they do this is they have trucks, collecting trucks from the refinery or from their co-op, come by, and they, like I said, they have a storage tank usually next to their pump. Sometimes they have 2, 3 pumps, in a close proximity, say like on an acre or half an acre, quarter of an acre property set up, and they pump that into the storage tanks. They're usually in the size 5,000 gallons, 10,000 gallons. And then the tank truck comes by, pumps it out, and brings it to the refinery. And they get paid for it, and whatever the market price is on that day when they close. And the larger oil fields, if there's a few more, then they go and they have a pipeline bringing it in. There's plenty of oil fields here. The closest one we have here in Kansas City is about 35 miles south of us, pumps, And like I said, this is a small thing, but it is a lot all over the place. So you have thousands of pumps going, and they're collecting a pretty good size amount of oil, and they're pumping just enough oil of what the refineries need, which in turn is what we're using here in Kansas in gas. So our gas price right now, I think it's about the lowest one we can get it. It's about $4.30 per gallon for regular 87 grade, and goes up to about, what did I pay the other day? $5.01, and I had 25 cents off per gallon, so I was paying $4.75 for premium because I had a gas card deal going there. And diesel is right around $4.95, $5 a gallon. And of course, that is high for us here too, but it is not as extreme as you have it in New York or on the West Coast, none of these places. And it is still cheaper than in Oklahoma. Even Oklahoma pays more because they have a different system. Now, if we would pay our farmers less, then our oil would be, or our fuel would be substantially cheaper. But, this is here, our local economy in Kansas. We have only 1.5 million or 2 billion people living here in our state. So we kind of support this. I support it, that's a good thing. So we have we're not dependent on anyone for oil or for gasoline. That's a fact when you live in Kansas. And we're not going to be running out of it. I don't know the rest of the world, but I know for one thing for sure, Kansas is not going to run out of oil, and we won't be not driving. And we have a very low gasoline tax and a very low, diesel tax from the state of Kansas, and there's no reason that they need to waive this. So because we're supporting our local economy here, this is our thing in Kansas, so to speak, and we're privileged to drive here. And so that brings that is kind of what we have. So technically we're not affected by any of this stuff, except that we pay, or the agreement was that the well owners, or the ones who are pumping the oil, getting the prevailing market rate. And that brings our fuel cost up. That's basically it. Technically, we wouldn't need to. We could probably have the cooperative and the refinery, agree on a set price, say like $60 a barrel, where they're still probably making good money on it. And, then we would be paying our $2.50 or $3 or something like this for our gas, the way we usually do it. But in this case, they're able to make some money, and there's a reason behind this. And that is really the underlying reason for the rest of the country, where everything is so screwed up outside of the state of Kansas or the Midwest in general. Oklahoma is doing okay. Texas is doing pretty well with their gasoline down there. So is Nebraska, Colorado, Wyoming, all of these central states here. We're doing pretty okay with gasoline and gas prices. They're still high, but better than other parts, and we have no reason to rationing anything. Now, when we look at the overall situation for the rest of the country, there is multiple things which happen. Well, the first thing is the IRS issues or publishes a list of active refineries for every state in the United States every month. You can download it from the IRS website. And there you can see in your state how many active refineries there are. And it will give you an idea of what actually is going on. At this point, I think there is a total of 85 active refineries, where 4 of them, like I said before, are here in Kansas. That leaves 81 for the other 49 states, including Hawaii, which has 2, out by Honolulu, out there in Ewa Beach. I've been out there in that industrial area. They get crude oil delivered there, and they're refining it on the islands because it makes economically more sense. So usually the fuel on Oahu, because I lived out there for 10 years, is usually cheaper because the refinery is on Oahu. And it is more expensive on the outer islands because the product has to be, the gasoline and the diesel has then to be shipped by barges over to the other islands, for Maui, Big Island, etc., etc. So, and that's kind of where that is. Now, when Trump took office, he was the big supporter of pipelines, and the pipelines were primarily to move oil, large quantities of crude oil from Alaska and Canada into the United States to larger refineries throughout the country. That was the strategy. So Kansas was already out of the loop. Like I said, it's because we were already independent, oil independent at that point when Trump took office. And this is the reason why we have less impact of this than anyone else has. Now, what Trump also did is he expanded the oil leases on public land. That means on land as well as on sea, like in the Gulf of Mexico, where most of this oil is really coming from here in the United States, is in the Gulf of Mexico. And other, parks, wherever you are in these national parks, they have oil reserves in certain areas of the country, and they can drill there for oil. So these large oil pipelines, which were supposed to have been built, or which they were building, but they then stopped it, that was all engineered during the Trump time. And America at that point actually became a net exporter of crude oil. And we're consuming here in the United States about 20 million barrels or 22 million barrels a day in crude oil. That's what we need. So anything what we produce after the 22 million barrels of crude oil can be exported somewhere else. Having now all of this oil coming in from Alaska and from Canada, plus the shale drilling down in Texas and in Oklahoma, increased the production. So we were producing more and more crude oil. At this point, we probably had about 100 refineries up and running here in the United States, running at about 92% capacity. And that was basically with everyone humming and jiffing along just fine. And then came COVID-19 in March, end of February, early March of 2020. And that's what changed everything. Now, what happened is, first of all, is that the oil price, when they closed the economy down, the oil price tanked. And it got so bad on that one day when everything was shut down that the oil actually traded in a negative range. That means whoever had a contract and they didn't want to take the physical delivery of the crude oil, they were trying to pay someone to actually take it. So you could have gotten 100,000 barrels of crude oil for free. Just if you had the storage capacity, you could have just taken it and put it away. And that's basically what happened. So there's a lot of smaller, a few of these refineries went bust. Some of these storage facilities went bust, and thus they went bankrupt, and so far and so on. And then the overall gasoline consumption went down, as well as the oil. There was no more airline traffic, so there was no jet fuel needed. There was no, the trucking was the only area which was moving because they needed the products, and everyone started to order from home. That was the other thing. So Amazon, FedEx, all of UPS, all of them, they needed a lot of fuel and diesel. So the diesel, basically, demand was still there, but the gasoline demand, because people didn't travel and stopped working or stopped going to the office, were working from home. Everyone who could work from home. That basically created an overcapacity in the refining sector. So they couldn't get rid of all the gasoline they were producing. So what they did is they kind of took out refineries. They either completely closed them down. There's like at least 5 to 10 refineries which were permanently shut down in certain parts of the country, especially the Democratic states, which had a more stricter, lockdown in place than the mid-states here. We were pretty relaxed with the stuff. So you still could go places, you could go shopping, you could still go to the restaurant and pick your food up. Some restaurants were open. They weren't really worried about the stuff that much out here. So, but it was the Democratic states primarily where the demand had really gone down to nothing, and they closed down the refineries. Some of them were old. Most of these refineries, these 80 refineries we have, the last refinery of these 81 we have in running right now was built in 1979. This is now over 44 years ago. And all the other ones, they're even older than this. They're going back into the 50s and 60s when they were built. So we're looking at refineries where the newest facility we have is 43 years old, and the other ones, they're basically up to 70, 75 years old. And on some of these refineries now, the pipes are rusting, and, depending on what kind of crude oil they have, we're using, if it is sour crude oil, which has a high sulfur content, they tend to rust more, and it's just a matter of time until there's going to be another facility going to fall out. So this is the overall situation right now. Because of this COVID thing, they had to shut them down because of the overcapacity, and they took them out primarily in those regions where the shutdown was more severe than in other states. And those refineries then were not restarted because either of age because once they stopped it and there was no more fluid moving through there, and the pipes were already rusted, they're so rusted now that the thing is probably going to explode as soon as you're going to start doing something in it. So 10 of these facilities at least were shut down permanently. And this is how we came out of this, or we went into the election cycle in 2020 with Biden winning this thing. And then, of course, Biden's next action was, as soon as he got to the office, as soon as he got inaugurated, he did the executive orders undoing all of the stuff what Trump had done with the pipelines. You know, building the pipelines, operating pipelines, and everything else. And then he also disallowed the renewal of leases, or they can get a lease, but they won't get a permit to pump oil, which is senseless. So this is now coming on top of this whole thing, is the entire change of with Biden's approach to this. So this has now created, now we have a oil shortage, or oil transport shortage, oil drilling shortage because of Biden. We have the lowered capacities, or, you know, in terms of refining, because we are -10 at least, or -12 refineries from already a very, you know, low refining capability. Like I said, they were at 92% when this thing had. So you take 10 refineries out, now we can do only, if they're going to operate now at 100%, they can do only probably 75, 80% of what they could do before, because we lost these 10 refineries. Now you would say, well, why don't the oil companies or the owners of the refineries fix them? Well, now you have California saying they're going to allow only electric cars from 2035 on. You have other states looking at the same thing, what they're doing. They want to push electric vehicles. If I own a refinery, even if it is 75 years old, and I say, well, they're going to face the combustion engines out, and I can get only maybe 10 more years out of this. This is 2022. By 2035, so 20 years of operations, I'm not going to invest $1 billion into refurbishing my facility. So what am I going to do? The thing is 75 years old. I'm going to close it down. I don't care. It doesn't matter. Now you have even less gas production and diesel production. It's that simple. So they're going to consolidate whatever is left, and the gasoline is going to get more and more expensive because you have less and less refining capacity. Even if they were to pump more oil, if Biden would say, well, I'm going to scrap all of this, what I did there in the beginning last year of 2021 when I came into office, and I allow now all the drilling and all the oil and all the pipelines and everything, they couldn't possibly process this, because we are, like I said, we're at this point already -10 or -12 refineries of what we had in the beginning of 2020, 2 years ago, or two and a half years ago. And as more of these old facilities are going to go out, as less gas we're going to have. And like I said again, is the owners of those facilities are not going to invest a lot of money. These things are very expensive to fix, and they're not going to expend any large money in there when they have the Democrats and have the Republicans running around with this electric car stuff. Yeah, I'm not going to spend $100 million, $500 million into a facility which may be obsolete in 10, 15, 20 years. You know, on something like this. Or even more money on these larger facilities. $1 billion is nothing for a refinery today, especially with the inflation we have. So all of this stuff combined set off a spiral, a vicious spiral of inflation, because everything is based and moved around diesel, primarily here in this country. So if the diesel prices go up, so will everything else, and you have a vicious cycle starting. And I do not know on how they want to fix this, if there's really anything you can do. I think you would, in order to undo this, you would have to give the refinery owners a guarantee that we will need refined oil products until 2050, 2075, 2100, in 50, 75 years, 100 years from now. Then they're going to start looking at this and say, yeah, we can do $1 billion and invest it if we're going to have a guarantee. But if they're going to come like California and they say we're going to allow only for new vehicles, only electric vehicles to be registered and titled in California from 2030 on or 2035 on, then the refinery owners, whether it's a multinational corporation or anything else, they will not go along with this. And this is why we're set up here in Kansas as a cooperative in terms of the oil producers, the oil pumpers. And we have contracted this over long term with that small refining corporation out of Colorado. So this is kind of on how we have worked this. And Europe is a similar scenario here too. You have the same thing. As soon as the politicians start talking electric vehicles, mandatory, and it's going to come by 2030, 2035, you won't see any big investments in a debt industry, basically. That's how they're looking at it. You're going to say 20 years, it's over. Gasoline is going to be a specialty. You're going to be paying $25 a gallon like you're paying for race fuel already. Then that's it. When you own an old timer like I do, you're going to pay $200, $300 to fill that thing up, $500 to fill it up. And it sits in the garage. You take it out once a year and you tuck around town. You drive 5 miles and you put it back in your garage. As a historic vehicle with a gasoline engine or with a combustion engine in it. That's kind of the direction this is going to go. But this is basically the underlying issues here. And for the better part, like I said, is pumping oil is one thing. The refinery sector is another. And we're minus 12 at this point and counting. Every time there's a problem with a refinery, they have to shut one down. The gasoline, independent from the oil price, is going to go up. They can pump as much oil as they want. At this point, there is just not enough refining capacity here than where we were before. So that's the reality of it. We're not hitting peak oil anytime soon. We're peak gas, yeah, because there's not enough refining there. That is man-made. And then Biden, with his oil thing there, that's but the real issue, the real pushing issue for no investment is the electric vehicle, and the states mandating this, that the new vehicles all have to be electric when they're going to get licensed or tagged, registered. And with that, you have a great evening.